even Kaivalya liberation, merging into oneness, without some sort of tinge of bhakti yoga, without having some sort of what is this called? Not punya. Agyata Sukriti is mentioned there. Without having some sort of activity in devotional service, whatever it may be or however small it may be, one can't make any sort of progress in devotional service. There's one verse in, let me see, I believe it comes later here. I was looking at a different verse, but I think it comes here as well. I'm thinking of something more. Yeah, okay. Here. Puyonamasad Vrijinachides Damasam Pavayakil Satvamurti Pomsam Punaf Param Hamsi Ashrame Vyavastitanam Anumurikadashishe. So Shukadeva Goswami, he later offering prayers, he says, I offer my obeisances into the form of complete existence and transcendence, who is the liberator of the pious devotees from all distresses and the destroyer of further advances in atheistic temperament of the non-devotee demons. And here's the important point. For the transcendentalists, who are situated in the topmost spiritual perfection, the Paramahamsas, he grants their specific destinations. So, for the Paramahamsas, their destinations are directly given by Lord Krishna himself. And generally it's taken that there are two sort of Mahatmas. There's the impersonalists and there's the personalist. Srila Jiva Goswami, commenting upon this verse, he says that this highest destination, Paramahamsa Ashrame. So that's mentioned here that the highest destination that Lord Krishna actually awards is Bhakti Yoga, more than anything else. So ultimately, whatever progress or whatever opulence one possesses in life, or whatever spiritual attainment one possesses, it's due to the mercy of Krishna, but specifically in the terms of spiritual advancement, it's due to some sort of highest activity in devotional service. Otherwise, there's no question of achieving any sort of auspiciousness. So the point is made here, or Srila Prabhupada he continues, such activities help one to reach this stage of Bhakti Yoga after many, many years. In the Bhagavad Gita, it said that those who are attached to the impersonal feature of the Absolute are liable to many troubles in the pursuit of their desired goal. And the empiricist philosophers, after searching after the absolute truth, realize the importance of Vasudeva realization is all in all, after many, many verses. So Srila Prabhupada is referring here on 12.5, Klesho Tika Tesham Avyakta Sapta Chetasam Avyakta Hikatir Dokam Divahadpir Avapyate. That for those whose minds are attached to the unmanifested and personal feature of the Absolute, advancement is very troublesome. To make progress in that discipline is always very difficult for those who are embodied. It's a very inauspicious path. It's auspicious in one sense, but inauspicious in another. Because for those who are on this path, they undergo a very great deal of austerities, self-abnegation, and generally it's taken as a very lonely path as well. Whereas those who are progressing on the path of devotional service, they always have Lord Krishna at their side, helping them along the way, and they can feel that reciprocation. Whereas the impersonalists, it's very difficult for them, because not only do they have to control their senses very rigidly, they don't have sense of a higher taste. Because up until the point they attain Brahman, they're just dealing with the material energy, more or less, negation of the material energy. And so, generally, Srila Prabhupada makes a point here in this purport, generally it's taken that even their daily sadhana, you could call, it's very difficult to follow. Srila Prabhupada says that they have to understand the unmanifested representation of the Supreme through such Vedic literatures as the Upanishads. And they have to learn the language, understand the non-perceptual feelings, and realize all these processes. It's very, even this word, non-perceptual feelings.
That's so big.
But Srila Prabhupada says here, for a devotee, there's no difficulty in approaching the Supreme immediately and directly. There's many cases of devotees or devotees in devotional service who have quickly attained perfection. Dhruva Maharaj is one such example, and there are many others following in his path. That even though one may newly be coming to the process of Krishna consciousness, one is immediately situated on a platform of far, far above even those impersonalists who have been striving for many, many lives, and those yogis who have even attained some mystic perfection. As Srila Prabhupada, he makes this point later in the purport that quoting this, what is that? Sarva. What is that? It is 647 is the last verse. Yogino napi sarva shamat gatinant ratmana shadhavan bhajati yomam sami yuktutamo mataha. That among all the yogis, all the different varieties of yogis, one who worships me, keeping me always within his heart, is the highest of all. So even for one who is just neophyte in devotional service, he is on a platform simply by taking the Lord's prasadam, one can conquer over the material elements, which the yogis, even aspiring for many, many lifetimes, they cannot do. That the material energy is very, very difficult to overcome by dint of our own endeavor, but by Krishna's grace, we can very quickly cross over this material energy, which mystics, even striving for years, cannot do. And so Srila Prabhupada, he says, continuing on, he's quoting the various verses from the Bhagavad Gita to substantiate this point. So he says, and look, the last instruction in the Bhagavad Gita advises fully surrendering unto the Lord, leaving aside all other engagements or different processes for self-realization and liberation from material bondage. And the purport of all Vedic literature is to induce one to accept the transcendental loving service of the Lord by all means. That's the end goal of all Vedanta. The end goal of all Vedic study, of all Vedic literature, is to approach the point of rendering devotional service unto Krishna. The end goal of our whole life is the whole material cosmic manifestation is simply to induce the living entity to take up Krishna consciousness once again, to revive his dormant Krishna consciousness. And the perfection of our lives and activities is again approaching this and coming to the stage of Krishna consciousness. And so Srila Prabhupada, he makes here the purport of all Vedic literature. So there's this verse, I don't know the whole, no, not Devataya, it's, what is it? I don't know the Sanskrit so well. It's the import of all Vedic literature. No. It's from the Upanishad. It's that for one who has strong faith in Guru and Krishna, all the imports of Vedic literature are revealed unto him. And in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srila Prabhupada makes the point in the Adi Lila, he quotes this verse, and he says, what is the import of all Vedic literature? What is the hidden secret of all Vedic literature? The hidden secret of all Vedic literature, the real import of Vedic literature, is Krishna consciousness, actually. So, by having firm faith in Guru and Krishna, having very strong faith, we open ourselves up to Krishna consciousness, and we allow not in the beginning, the tendency to hear, and by the initial faith we take up the process of Krishna consciousness, but also in the higher levels that by maintaining strong faith in Guru and Krishna, that this real devotees as well, this real devotional service becomes manifest. There's one. In other words, higher stages of devotional service become manifest, and even our faith strengthens. Sutam prasangam mama virya samvidvido bhavanti hirit karna rasayana kataha tats joshnat ash apavarga vartamani shraddha ratir bhaktir anukramishati. So all these three things, shraddha, faith, ratir, taste, and then bhaktir, real devotional service, Srila Prabhupada translates as. Follow in the wake of hearing and chanting in the association of devotees by taking up this process of Krishna consciousness. And so, continuing with the purport, Srila Prabhupada says that as already explained in the text of Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, either by direct bhakti yoga or the means which ultimately culminate in bhakti yoga, without any tinge of fruitive activity constitutes the highest form of religion. And Srila Prabhupada makes an interesting point that anything, either the direct process of bhakti yoga itself or the means which ultimately culminate in bhakti yoga, meaning one may not initially be on the platform of direct devotional service, but if whatever platform he's following leads him to the point of the pure devotional service, that is also the highest form of religion. Just as Krishna gives in the Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavad Gita is a text solely dealing, well, it deals with different types of yogas, but the real purport of Krishna's instruction is to hit on Bhakti Yoga, the Krishna consciousness. And in the 12th chapter, which directly describes Krishna consciousness, Lord Krishna, he gives the direct process of Krishna consciousness, but then he gives so many other means there. He says, if you can't do this, do this. If you can't do this, do this. If you can't purely render devotional service something, you just try and think of me. If you can't do all of this, at least try to give in charity, etc., like this. Well, the idea that these lower processes of religion, these sub-religious principles, they lead one to the higher rungs of direct Krishna consciousness. If these sub-religious principles, they don't bring one to the point of perfection in devotional service, simply by following things like, so many things there. And one in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna mentions charity. So simply by being charitable, without coming to the point of Krishna consciousness, it has no benefit for the living entity. Simply practicing a yoga system without ultimately coming to the point of chanting Hare Krishna and worshiping Krishna, it's all completely useless for the living entity. Because although he may attain some sort of temporary benefit from that yoga process, ultimately he doesn't deliver himself from the chain of birth and death. And even, there's one verse in the second canto, it comes later, Tapasvino dana para yashasvino manasvino mantra vidas mangalaha kshemam vidanti vinayar arpanam tasmai subhadra shabasi namo namaha. So Shukadeva Goswami, he again says, let me offer my respectful obeisances unto the all-auspicious Lord Sri Krishna again and again, because the great learned sages, the great performers of charity, the great workers of distinction, the great philosophers and mystics, the great chanters of the Vedic hymns, and the great followers of Vedic principles cannot achieve any fruitful result without the dedication of such great qualities to the service of the Lord. So all this, Srila Prabhupada makes different points of this purport, just summarizing that although one may be known as a very great charitable man, a great worker of distinction, etc., like this, it's all just a title and a sham if he doesn't dedicate his fruits for the service of Lord Krishna. Srila Prabhupada said, to read a little bit from this purport. For example, what is the interest of maintaining body and soul together? One earns money for maintenance of the body, personal and social, but unless there is God consciousness, unless the body is being properly maintained to realize one's relation with God, all good efforts to maintain the body and soul together are similar to the attempts of the animals to maintain body and soul together. All these things, advancement of learning, economic development, philosophical research, study of Vedic literature even. One may be studying the Vedic literature, one may be studying a yoga text, this or that, but without proper understanding of Krishna, it's all useless. Or even the execution of pious activities, like charity, opening of hospitals, and the distribution of food grains, should all be done in relation to the Lord. And the result of this is samsiddhir haritoshanam, that by satisfaction of Hari, by satisfaction of Krishna, then all of our activities also consequently become perfect. But and to become God conscious, one has to hear about the all auspicious Lord, as described in Vedic literature. So this is real auspiciousness. Otherwise, all these other activities one may execute under the guise of advancement of civilization, it's simply a waste of time for the performer, actually. It's just shrama evahi kevalam. It doesn't benefit us in any real way. Although superficially it may look like to the worldly man, opening so many hospitals, educating people in moral codes, bringing people out of poverty, etc., like this. Although superficially from a mundane platform, it's very good, from the transcendental perspective, it's completely useless. And even to the point of devotional service, if we bring people into Krishna consciousness, but we don't ultimately elevate them to the point of hearing and chanting and remembering about Krishna, then all of their apparent is just sarvanash, it's just completely useless. Because the real point of direct devotional service unto Krishna hasn't been achieved. Again, in the same set of prayers, there's one very nice verse. Yat kirtanam yat smartanam yadikshanam yat vandanam yat shravanam yat arhanam lokasya sadhyo vidanoti kalamasham tasmai subhadra shavase namo namaha. So Shukadeva Goswami, this is 2:4:15. Shukadeva Goswami, he says, let me offer my respectful obeisances unto the all-auspicious Lord Sri Krishna, about whom glorification, remembrance, audience, prayers, hearing, and worship can at once cleanse the effects of all sins of the performer. So why is devotional service the only all auspicious means for all living entities within the universe? Because two things: Krishna is all auspicious. So naturally, by associating, by hearing chanting, etc., remembering the all auspicious, we also become all auspicious. Just as the example of the iron rod into a fire. And two, also secondarily, it can at once cleanse. This process of devotional service can at once cleanse the sins of the performer. At once, the effects of devotional service begin to take effect in one's character. And you can see it practically. Even if somebody's been in devotional service for a short time, if you see their character even 6 months ago, it very rapidly changes. And that's because the effects of devotional service, and specifically the effects of chanting the holy name of the Lord, O King, there's no more doubtless and fearless way than the chanting of the chanting of the holy name. That this chanting of the holy name, it doesn't depend on any sort of ritualistic formality or even initiation into devotional service, the process of diksha. Rather, the holy name immediately takes effect on one's character, and immediately the effect is Shrimvatam Svakata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana Hridi Andistya Bhadrani Vidanoti Surit Satam. Then immediately Krishna begins cleansing one's heart of all the impurities that are there, and immediately there is effect. So, concluding the purport, Srila Sridhar Swami and all other acharyas like Srila Jiva Goswami agree that bhakti yoga is not only easy, simple, natural, and free from trouble, but it is the only source of happiness for the human being. So this process of devotional service is susukam kartamavyayam. It's very joyously executed, whereas in contrast with every other spiritual processes, which are generally self-denying, very difficult, very as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, as I quoted, one undergoes a very great deal of austerity and difficulty to take up these processes. But yet, bhakti yoga is not only easy; it's easy, simple, and natural, and it's the only source of happiness for the living entity. Generally, when you understand the bhakti yoga is reserved for the highest transcendentalists, as I said, the Paramahamsas. Queen Kunti actually, she says. Tata Paramahamsanam Muninam Amalatmanam Bhakti Yoga Vidanartam Katam Pashyema Historiya. That generally, Lord Krishna comes to award devotional service to the Paramahamsas, Paritraranaya Sadhunam, etc. That he protects the sadhus and he grants them devotion. He grants those Paramahamsas, those sadhus, devotional service. But, and she naturally prays out of her humility, Katam Pashyema Historiya. How can we possibly understand you who are just normal women? But it's in this process of bhakti yoga, it's inherent in the heart of every living entity. It's very simple, very natural, and very easy to execute than any other process in this material world, actually. It's very difficult to not only for the impersonalists to execute their vows of austerity, their vows of meditation, their processes of sadhana, their studies in Vedanta. It's also very, very, very hard for the fruitative workers, the materialists in this world, to wake up at 9 o'clock, go to work at 10 o'clock, and spend all day working, and then come home, eat some fast food they purchased on the way, and go to sleep. They have their own processes of, austerities. They're even existing in this world and working in this world as a fruitative worker is very, very difficult. It's not easy. But this process of bhakti yoga is much easier than any other thing in this world. It's the easiest of all processes. It's very simple. Anybody can offer any fruit, any flower, any leaf unto Krishna. Anybody can chant Hare Krishna. Not anybody, but most people they can read these literatures. It's not very difficult. And what to speak of anybody is, the process of deity worship is very easy. The process of chanting Hare Krishna is very easy. At the base of it is just hearing and chanting. Whereas all these other complications in material society, say working a job for some IT company, it's such a strain on the brain to go through all of this stuff. If having to do anything in this world, working as some sort of accountant, how much headache you have to do just to go through the numbers. You have to learn a whole system. And what it speak if you're just a layman doing whatever construction work, how much effort you have to put into doing that, how much physical exertion you have to put into doing that, and it shortens your lifespan. Srila Prabhupada explains that the amount of breaths. Our life is determined. We have a set number of breaths in this life. So the more we, when one exercises, when one exerts himself too far, naturally one breathes more and more and more, and naturally exhausts his life very prematurely. So even, so many people working just as lay jobs, as manual labor, they're exhausting their life prematurely. It's a very difficult and very unpalatable form of life. And ultimately, as Srila Prabhupada concludes here, it doesn't make any of them happy. These impersonalists who are striving for impersonal realization, and these fruitive workers who have access to so many sensual pleasures, it doesn't bring happiness to either of them. We see in the case of the impersonalists, when Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu went to Kashi, Varanasi, and he met with Prakashananda and his leading sannyasi disciples there, that they recognized in Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu an effulgence and a nature that they had not previously seen before, and that they had directly concluded that he's not different from Narayan. This is Lord Narayan himself. And they could detect that for want of all their dry studies in Vedic literature, they hadn't actually achieved anything. And actually, Lord Chaitanya pointed out to them they were actually being misled. Similarly, with Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, who was he was the king of Orissa's advisor, a very learned logician. He was famous throughout at least the whole of the east of India, and he himself also very well acquainted with Vedanta philosophy. But when he tasted the nectar of devotional service that Lord Chaitanya bestowed on him, there's one verse there. It says something akin to that. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya was a logician accustomed to eating dry oil cakes. But I forget the second half. But I don't know. I always wondered that. But when he tasted the nectar of Lord Chaitanya's devotional service, he gave up everything and he became a very intimate associate of Lord Chaitanya. Similarly, too, there are so many different, just fruitive workers, so to speak, that have been delivered from Lord Krishna's pastimes, Lord Chaitanya's pastimes, and we can see even our own example is the happiness and the results of material life in comparison to that which is offered in devotional service is very, very negligible. It doesn't offer us anything, any sort of whatever may exist in the outside world, although superficially it may appear very attractive. It may appear very attractive to our mind to own a very fancy car. As Mahotsa Prabhu was saying just yesterday, everything in this material world is designed in such a way to attract our senses. It's like now we have, the latest iPhone, but then next year there's a new iPhone that's going to come out, and then a new iPhone. The material world is always changing. So even if we have the best of the best materially, it degrades by nature. And even for that time, we were situated in the most, in the highest material position, so to say, we're still dissatisfied. If you look at the material leaders of this world, and if you look at the Bhagavatam as well, Hiranyakashipu practically had everything as he was ruling over Indra's planet, when he was sitting on Indra's throne, but still he was dissatisfied at heart. Still, he was cursed by Kam, Lobha, etc. like this, by the 6 enemies. Because he hadn't conquered over his own mind, he was always dissatisfied in life. So too, in our own life, until we come to the point of conquering over the mind by rendering devotional service, we'll always be dissatisfied with whatever position we may be in. This world is never fixed, and this world is always changing. But we can find solace in this point of bhakti yoga. We can find this real happiness and this real sense of peace that we're striving for, that we're looking in so many other different facets of this world for in the process of devotional service and in the process of bhakti yoga. Therefore, for those who are wandering in the material universe, there is no more auspicious means of deliverance than what aims at the direct devotional service of the Lord. So therefore, this devotional service of the Lord is the most important thing in not only human society, in the whole world. And to inculcate this ourselves and to distribute it unto others is the most important process we could possibly we could take up and we could utilize this life for. There's one verse that's coming to my mind. I don't know exactly what verse. Just give me. It's Prahlad Maharaj. Give me 1 second while I try to pull it up. I believe this word actually comes here.
Which one?
This is residents of Jambudu offer prayers.
Oh yeah, Society Vishwasya Kala.
Do you know the verse number?
Giant is 5. It's just type Om Shrom, and the next verse after that. So that's Asi Vishwasya Kala Prasidatam, Giant to Bhutani Mito Shivadiya, Manashya Bhadram Bhajatam Adokshide, Avekshitamnu Matarapya Haitaki. I think it's 5:11:18.
Yeah, so I'll just read the English. So Prahlad Maharaj, he offers his prayer to Lord Nrsimhadev in the 5th canto. May there be good fortune throughout the universe, and may all envious persons become pacified. May all living entities become calm by practicing bhakti yoga, for by accepting devotional service, they will think of each other's welfare. Therefore, let us all engage in the service of the Supreme Transcendence, Lord Sri Krishna, and always remain absorbed in thought of him. So, Srila Prabhupada brings out a few points in this purport that's, well, first he's bringing out the point of this is the attitude of a Vaishnava. That a Vaishnava recognizes this, that the real benefit of the living entity lies in this process of accepting devotional service. And he tries to see that each and every living entity, he tries his best to distribute this process of devotional service unto all. So, there's one specific point in this purport. So, forgive me, I'm just scanning through. I'm looking for something. So, yeah. No. There's one thing in regarding the snake. So the difficulty is that the kala, envious living entity, is rarely pacified. One kind of kala, the snake, can be pacified simply by mantras or by the action of a particular herb. Mantra shaudi vashaha. Sarpa kalakena nivaryate. An envious person, however, cannot be pacified by any means. Therefore, Prahlad Maharaj prays that all envious persons may undergo a change of heart and think of the welfare of others. In Srila Prabhupada, he writes, if the Krishna consciousness movement spreads all over the world, and if by the grace of Krishna everybody accepts it, thinking of envious people, the thinking of envious people will change. Everyone will think of the welfare of others. Therefore, Prahlad Maharaj prays, Shivam mito dhiya. In the material activities, everyone is envious of others. But in Krishna consciousness, no one is envious of anyone else. Everyone thinks of the welfare of others. Therefore, Prahlad Maharaj prays that everyone's mind may become gentle by being fixed at the lotus feet of Krishna. Bhajatad adokshaji. As indicated elsewhere in the Bhagavatam, Savai Mana Krishna Padaravindayoho, and as by Lord Krishna and the Bhagavad Gita, one should constantly think of the lotus feet of Krishna. Then one's mind will certainly becomes cleansed. So it continues on for a little bit like this. But the point is this, is that we should understand that this is the mood of our acharyas, and this is the mood of the Vaishnavas in the Bhagavatam are examples in Srimad Bhagavatam Chaitanya Charitamrita to distribute this most auspicious process of Krishna consciousness to one and all. Not to accept it not only for our own self, but also to see to others that are also receiving that devotional service. As was the mood of Prahlad Maharaj, as was the mood of Vasudeva Datta, as was the mood of Lord Chaitanya, Nityananda Haridas Thakur, etc., his associates. So as was the mood of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and our own Srila Prabhupada, we should too imbibe the same mood. And benedicting the living entities in this world were the real means of auspicious deliverance. So that's basically all the points in the purport I've kind of skimmed through. So I can end my class there and open it up for comments, discussions, etc. like this at this time.
There's time, right? There's time. The offering is not gone. You know this. This verse that you just quoted, may all living entities be pacified. Mm-hmm. He makes that prayer right after the most famous prayer. We know Om Namo Bhagavate Narasimhaya, and
it's amazing that, Prahlad Maharaj is making that prayer, being the king of the demons. He's the king of the demons who are extremely averse to godly qualities and averse to Vishnu. But he's praying to Lord Nrsimhadev, right? He's making the prayer.
Yeah, to Lord Nrsimhadev. He makes the same prayer, actually, now that you're bringing it up, later in the 7th canto.
Right.
Etc. I pray for no material desires, as he does in Om Shrom.
Yeah.
And then again, he prays for the deliverance of his father, who is an envious living entity. So the same thing in the 5th canto.
Yeah, it's so amazing. I mean, how much faith devotees like Prahlad Maharaj should actually have in the process of devotional service, that he is the king of the demons. He's head of all these people who are completely averse. He's not the devotee of Krishna, but he has so much faith in the process of devotional service that he prays that even the demons become non-envious. They've taken that birth, like, if you read in the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, Kali is praying to Krishna that, my dear Krishna, I'm given this body of a snake, and with the body of a snake comes the psychology of the snake. Therefore, either you kill me or you give me your mercy with devotional service, which will actually subdue my envious mentality. So the only thing which can actually fix our envious nature and all these things is actually devotional service, and devotional service alone. And I was thinking about that. And another thing, you're making this point that how materialists are like foolishly stupid. Prabhupada was actually speaking about how in 26 Second Avenue, the person who owned the building, he was like a middle-aged Polish guy with a beer belly and a beard. That's how he's described in the Leela Amrita. And Prabhupada many times would criticize, him to the disciples, saying, you see, this person, he spent his entire life savings buying this horrible building. The building was in not such a good condition. And even after he spent all that money, he has to work like an ass just to maintain it. Just see how like futile material endeavors are. Prabhupada is making that point. Anyway, I have other points too, but if anyone else has something else, otherwise I can.
Anything else? More points? Vishnu?
So, Prahlad Maharaj is the king of the demons, but are the residents of Harivamsa demons?
No, but like he's the king of all. Guru Maharaj makes his point in this lecture, Bali and Vamana, as to how all the demons under Prahlad Maharaj they were very fired out with him for his Vishnu Bhakti. And one of the things that they did very carefully was they made sure that Virochana was kept separate from Prahlad Maharaj because they didn't want him to influence their son.
No, I know, but specifically in this regard, he is leading the residents of Harivamsa in this particular prayer that where he is praying to Nrsimhadev in the 5th canto. He's leading the residents of Harivamsa, Harivarsha, or whatever that is. So it's one of the it says the residents of Jambudvip. This is actually Bhuloka. It's not the it's not the abode of the demons. It's actually the abode of humans. And my understanding is that even the other Jambudvipa Vasis, they're actually in higher realms of material enjoyment than Bharatavarsha. So this Harivarsha, I don't think they're demons. Although Prahlad Maharaj is leading them in prayers, and I don't know how Prahlad Maharaj is there and what exactly, but I would suspect that they're not demons.
So if you read the words that he quoted, Prahlad Maharaj is saying that may all living entities, all of them, right? So including the demons. So Prahlad Maharaj being the king of the demons also, he knows how envious demons are. He knows how their entire swabhava is. So he's praying not just for the residents of Harivarsha, but he's praying for all the residents of the world, and he knows how envious demons can be. So although he has such envious, he knows that this association can be so envious, still he has so much faith in devotional service that he
he has confidence that by making this prayer, that even the envious nature of the demons can be subdued.
Okay, sure. I mean, I know he's making. I know he's making a prayer for the whole world. However, it just seemed like you had implied or indicated the way you framed your sentences was indicative that he was leading the residents of Hari Vamsa, who are also demons.
No.
That's how I kind of like heard and understood what you said. I know he's praying for the whole world.
Yeah,
There's no doubt
that's
about
my
that.
point, that he's praying for the whole world, and he knows how it is to be raised among demons. And like he was making the point that even to Hiranyakashipu, when Hiranyakashipu was being killed, he made like a similar prayer. So he knows the nature of demons. And
Yeah, I mean there's no disagreement on that. But
that's my point.
okay, the residents of Hari Vamsa are not demons.
Yeah, I never said.
Hari Varsha, sorry.
Okay, anything else from the men's side? Mataji's, any points or questions?
I wanted to ask, on one hand, we hear about how, here devotional service removes envy. This is also our experience here at Krishna Life. However, those who have had who have experienced certain unfortunate things within devotional society have seen how sometimes it may seem that devotees are practicing and following, and still there's so much like envy and difficulties and things like that, and politics and things like that. How do you? Sometimes it's a cause of maybe losing some faith also, or like it's a little bewildering at the least in some situations. So, any comments on that?
Why does envy continue in some people even though they...
Yeah, it seems like, envies can, and it's almost like, so sometimes, you hear things, well, now you're all doing, it's all good, but as it grows, it's expected that, certain things will happen, but or it's almost like they say it's a given that problems in politics and things like that will happen because it's the material world, and that's true. On the other hand, it can be a little discouraging also. And is there any things that we have to keep in mind to keep that at bay? So two parts to the question. One, why does it exist within devotional society? Second, how can we keep it at bay?
Mm-hmm. Well, so second point, or I guess first point, is that why does it exist? It exists because we're envious of Krishna. We're just simply put, as long as somebody's on the stage of sadhana and the bhakti, there's going to be envy in his heart because he hasn't perfected himself. Even if he's on the stage of bhava bhakti, until he completely eliminates that envy and that desire to want to enjoy this material world separate from Krishna, there's going to be some envy in his heart. And as long as there's envy of Krishna, there will be envy of other living entities. And so that can manifest itself in different ways. And of course, it's like an individual case for everybody. And sometimes somebody may appear to be very advanced in devotional service, but when prompted, then that envious nature actually comes out. Just as Hiranyakashipu, he seemed very affectionate towards his son, but when prompted or provoked by Prahlad Maharaj, when there was a provoking situation, then the actual nature appeared there. So why does it continue? Well, again, the same thing is that envious nature was always there. Sometimes, generally, I understand in relation to the second point, when Srila Prabhupada was asked this, how do you cultivate, these, I forget what quality he was being asked. This is sometime in 1968, 69, basically the idea is, how do you become humble? How do you become tolerant? How do you become all these things? And the purport is that, Yasyasi bhaktir bhagavati kinchana sarvair gunastatura samatasati suraha harava bhaktisa kato mahadagunat manoratina sati dhavato pahihi. That automatically by executing the devotional service, all these qualities become manifest. It's not that we have to separately strive for, whatever. It's envy naturally becomes curtailed by devotional service. That's the philosophical understanding. So that should be, that's the explanation given by Srila Prabhupada. So it may seem that And it may be seen in some character that they may be executing devotional service, but some anartha is not decreasing. That may be the result of not executing pure devotional service. If one is executing pure devotional service, the fact that envy has to go down. If there's not envy, if there's whatever it may be, there could be envy, it could be some other anarthas. Just like some people, they hang on to attachments of greed. Some people hang on to attachments of lust. Some people hang on to so many other attachments of anger. So it may be due to different forms. But if one is executing pure devotional service, and if one is sincerely desiring to render pure devotional service means we're willing to serve our predecessor acharyas in Krishna in a cooperative manner, purely. So if somebody has some sort of self-intention motive, then naturally envy enters in. So just like so many different ideas or examples can be given, but then it's just like, in the Bhagavad Bazar, Gaudiya Mat, that because of self-intention, so much shortly envious nature cropped up and people were fighting over this room, that room. So two ideas, this is my zone, this is my temple, this is my congregation, this is that. This sort of I, me, mine, this, that idea is not the full understanding of it. It's actually all for the service of Krishna, and ultimately it's all for the service of preaching Srila Prabhupada's mission, etc. like that. There's so many other points, it really depends on the situation, but ultimately it comes down to the point of not executing. If there's not purification, there's not proper execution of devotional service. Just like Srila Prabhupada said in a lecture in 1968, he said that if you're following Krishna consciousness and you're executing Krishna consciousness, you must become happy. So similarly, if you're executing Krishna consciousness, you must give up these anarthas. Otherwise, if you don't give them up, how can you achieve the higher states of devotional service? So there must be some fault in the execution of devotional service on the part of that person. And two, some people, the pure is not just a blank slate for everybody, meaning that it's different people have different anarthas. Some person may have a very extreme anger problem. So it's not that, whereas coming from that background, and somebody else may be very mild nature just coming from that background. So it's not that superficially it may appear that both people will be in devotional service for a year. One person has a problem with anger still, one person may not have a problem with anger. That doesn't mean that they're not executing devotional service purely, necessarily. It's just a gradual process of purification, if that makes sense. So there's that. Is that sufficient? Is that okay? Is that okay? Yeah.
It's also, we understand, this Nishidachar Kutinati Jiva Himsam.
Yeah.
Lava Puja Pratisajata Upashaka Gan. That, you're performing devotional service, but you're in the name of performing devotional service, you're exploiting devotional service to grow your anarthas. Like some people may actually see that, oh wow, okay, I want to live an easygoing life, and I see the facility, and I know what I need to do to exploit the facility. Therefore, I'll perform devotional service to exploit the facility, and do all these things, work as minimum as possible, get as much of it out of it as possible. And we're performing devotional service, but we're actually watering our, the weeds of which look like Bhakti Lata, but they're actually weeds, which choke up the Bhakti Lata. And because they choke them up, then what happens is, of course, the holy name is also Nama Chintamani Krishna. It fulfills all your desires. The holy name fulfills all your desires. So, you're chanting Hare Krishna, you're doing all these things, but the motivation is for personal gain. And because of that, the weeds grow instead of the devotional creeper. Also, the other example also is given of Nalkuvara and Manigriva. They were bathing in the Mandakini river, which is the Ganges river in the heavenly planets, And they were bathing there, but still, Mandakini, a river, they were bathing there, but because their consciousness was not that of like, I'm bathing in a holy river, but just of being enjoyers, they were not getting purified. So similarly, if we have the mentality of being enjoyers, we may be like, submerged in the ocean of, Sankirtan and all these things, but because we have the mentality of being enjoyers, we won't be purified of these anarthas.
That's why, that system is so important of having those, it's generally you'll have your, you saw in the beginning, there's those devotees that are establishing it, and then they generally, that they're, they've worked there. When somebody establishes something, then there's like a level of like, you could say attachment to that particular service, and that enthusiasm for that service is there. And so what happens is, like Guru Maharaj says, that strong men create good times, good times create weak men, and weak,
bad times create
this is right.
bad times create
Strong men
Strong men
create good times, create weak men, and weak men create bad times. So we've, at least if we look at our history, we've had the bad times and then it's created some strong men, and then so therefore we have a good time. We have a good facilities, we have good book distribution. But if that level of difficulty isn't remained, like often you recite how Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur always wanted us to stay in debt. If that difficulty and that push towards the newer devotees is not being maintained, then that level of laziness and sleeping and eating, that comes through. And then we've seen that devotees who try to do that, and then you grab onto it and then they leave. And that's the most common thing that happens here, is they come in with some motive, but they're not allowed to exercise that motive. So that requires the devotees who are training devotees and who are watching the devotees to be very vigilant and very careful in how we are training devotees, whoever that is now and whoever that is in the future, that are like, it requires us to do that. It's difficult also, because you have to be harsh with some people, and you have to sometimes take the extreme end than the softer end. So it's just it requires a lot of that field. That Guru Maharaj gave that lecture in Atlanta, and he said that you're going to have to put a lot of time in, time, money, men. So it requires a level of a few devotees to always be on that sort of, guard, to advise devotees and see who's coming in with a particular motive and who's not. And so that's also there.
So the challenge is, of course, every devotee has to be personally sincere, and it's really personal endeavor that can actually overcome this. But there also seems to be a level of organizational responsibility to minimize opportunities for these kind of activities, and that's where things get a bit difficult. You see, initially devotees are generally, when a group is smaller and facilities are not that opulent, then the group tends to be sincere, less things to fight about, and more mission driven and things like that. Then as facilities grow, facilities are grown to provide service opportunities for devotees, and then as the facility grows, what happens is you tend to get all these kind of people who come with different kinds of motivations. And what happens is, generally by the time, and even though that might be kept at bay for some time, generally the devotees who were present during the initial phases of a particular project tend to feel that they've done their part and tend to hand things over to other people in many cases. Or they may stay there, but they may hold things, they may hold the fortress down until they're present, but there's no one really to take over. And in both of these cases, what happens is sometimes there's inevitably, as when you have a lot of things going on, there's always the danger of shortage of manpower, and then you start including other people in, and then you're not as strict as you would like to be, because you need service to go on, for instance, like deity worship, and then things tend to really go quickly downhill. Mm-hmm. This is I think I'm speaking of a cycle that we've seen. Cycle? Well, I don't know if it's a cycle, but it's at least a linear trend, because we don't know what's happening on the other side, because we haven't got there yet, right? With several projects where there are senior Prabhupada disciples who are still present, we don't really know what's after, how the movement's going to look like 10, 12, 15 years from now. But just speaking from our perspective here, that's a challenge. How do you deal with this? How do you not go down the same road? You know.
Well,
I'm not. I don't.
that's a big question. I mean, it's not a fact in that, like, inevitably. The thing is, it is a trend, but it's not like a certainty. That you could, if you look at places, there are situations historically and also within devotional society that who have achieved some sort of opulence, but haven't degraded from there. Like, a prominent one in America is Los Angeles. I mean, Los Angeles is the most opulent tip in America. Unarguably. The deity worship is so opulent. The prasadam they offer to the deity is so opulent. You know, they get flowers. Anyway, so many things could be said. But it never, anyway, some in material world and some things do happen in some places, but it's never like gone down. Now, that point is, okay, you could argue that the senior management is still there. What happens with that leaves? We don't know. We don't know. I mean, there's always a little bit. Historically, there's always been turmoil when, even Srila Prabhupada, he points out in the 4th canto, just taking it a little more generally, when there's a change of guard, so to say, there's a little bit of turmoil, and whatever it may be. If you look at within the Gaudiya Sampradaya, and also other Sampradayas, I don't know, I can't really speak for that so much, but if you look at practically, if you look at other major world religions, actually, I mean, if you look at Christianity, it was the same thing. If you look at Islam, I mean, practically after Muhammad, there were four. I don't know the Arabic term, but there were four good caliphs, they call them, and then after that, there were so many offshoot caliphates from that, and then there's Shiite then rose up, and then the other Sunni Shiite split, and then there's so many other unheard different strands of Islam that even today we practically don't know. So what to do about it? It's just natural that's it's inherent. I mean, as I see it, and as I understand it, it's due to, it's just inherent in a sense, and it can be combated against the degradation of basically the pure message or the pure following of it, and it just comes down to the point that. I mean, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he said that just paraphrasing him, when a religion when a spiritual process becomes institutionalized, it's more or less the death of it. Of course, he made an institution, but he was also making that point, because inevitably with an institution, is like you're saying, there's facility, etc. There's so many things that are going on, and then the real spirit of what was originally established can be lost. So, as to what to do about it, I don't know. Just combat against it. The best we can do about it is just follow strictly in our own lives and adhere to the process of Krishna consciousness in our own lives. My understanding of it is that ultimately it's up to Krishna and it's up to Lord Chaitanya. Because the point is this, so how do we preserve Lord Krishna as Lord Chaitanya's movement? We just have to follow ourselves. We have to execute the principles ourselves. We have to distribute those principles to others ourselves. And then it's just up to Krishna. If Lord Chaitanya wants to spread the movement like that, he's going to spread the movement somehow. However it will be done, we don't know. We can't say, if we start speculating with so much foresight, what if this happens, what if that happens? It could happen, we can make measures against it, but ultimately it's up to the mercy of Lord Chaitanya. And we've seen that when there's a degradation, reform comes about by those devotees who sincerely practice the process and try to adhere to the pure tenets. So just trying to do that in our own lives is the best answer and solution I can give. I mean, it's what I feel that we've done. It's what I feel our own Guru Maharaj has done. And you see the result of that. So, of course, it's not perfect, but it's the material world. How can it be? How can it be perfect? So many even in at least Sri Vaishnava, from my very limited knowledge, even that whole Sampradaya, they had a split at one point. Now, the split still exists. It's not so much talked about anymore because the late Sri Vaishnavas, they don't really understand the philosophy so much in general. But regardless, so You want to offer?
In this particular, why did they do that? That's so stupid. Chandan, stop singing. In this particular question was actually asked to Murli Bhattar, or what's the other Sri Vaishnava's name who spoke in the Sri Rangam camp on the Vyasasan with Guru Maharaj? What was the other Sri Vaishnava? Murli Bhattar and Gopalan. But you know who I'm talking about. Yeah. It's not Lakshmi Tatacharya.
No, not Lakshmi.
What are you doing? You're trying to tell me to cut off because the time is up?
I would not do that.
Okay. So, and he was doing like this the whole time. So, I was asking him why he's doing that. So, not Lakshmi Tatacharya, but the other, you know who I'm talking about though. So, there's this lecture called Infighting among the Sampradaya, where Guru Maharaj is actually interviewing the Sri Vaishnava, and Sridhar Srinivas Prabhu is also there on it, and they actually start going over. I mean, they were humble enough to admit that preaching spirit of the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya was kind of lost. Because if we see all the way in Nepal, we'll see that there's this Ramanuja Sampradaya, what Ramanandis? That Guru Maharaj was making a point that, at one point of time, the Sri Vaishnava was so fired up that they went all the way to Nepal to preach. I mean, that's a big deal. I mean, like, you're all the way in South India, you made your way up to Nepal, and you don't have flights or anything like that, You go by bullock cart or whatever you go by. And it went so far. So what happened? And it's like an hour, and it's actually a 2-hour lecture, I think. A 2-hour conversation that they have. And one of the things that that Prabhu says is that there was a lot of infighting, and there was so much infighting amongst the Sampradaya that he suspects that that's one of the reasons why the preaching spirit was lost. So one thing was, of course, you can never undermine the Krishna fact and the Lord Chaitanya fact, and is their desire and why all of that goes. But one of the conclusions that it was like 5 years ago I was listening to this lecture, so I'm a little fuzzy with all the details of it. But one of the conclusion that was actually being made was that like this infighting should like be to a minimum. Of course, and you should care enough for the Siddhanta also. You should care enough to establish the proper Siddhanta, and you should communicate it to the next generation. And the simple answer to all this is, I guess it's not so simple, is actual proper Daiva Varnashrama Dharma, where you're creating progeny, you're creating offsprings who are raised in this culture. I mean, that's how Sri Vaishnavism has gone on for so long. Is the longest standing Vaishnava Sampradaya that exists on the planet that we know of. And the reason it's gone on is because they are able to create progeny. And it's not just like 1 or 2 or 3, but so many. And that's why, when Vyasadeva, impregnated Ambalika and gave Pandu to her, Pandu to her, still Satyavati, the mother, was like, okay, one good prince is not good enough. We need a few more. Therefore, like, she asked him to beget another one, and he just got Vidura, And then Bhishma, when he's trying to find a match for Dhritarashtra, he is actually making sure that actually we need to find a suitable wife for him, because he has a boon. Like, Vyasadeva gave him a boon that Dhritarashtra will have 100 sons, and he was looking for someone also who had a similar boon. And the reason they married each other, Gandhari and Dhritarashtra, was because Gandhari also got a boon from Lord Shiva that she will have 100 sons. So the reason they wanted to get them together is there will be so much succession. Having 100 Kuru princes will be great. So similarly here also, the amount of people who can succeed, the amount of preachers, the amount of potential people who can push forward the movement should be so much in number that even if like 50 of the Kuru, according to like Bhishma's logic, even if 50 of them were to die, 50 more are there to carry on the Guru lineage, lineage of the Kuru. So similarly, the infighting should reduce. It should be to a minimum. Of course, there'll always be like establishing the proper Siddhanta, and the focus should always be on the preaching. focus should always be on the books. That's why, and how do both these things work out? Guru Maharaj told us on that phone call, books and farms. By keeping our focus on book, and not just you remain the best book distributor for the rest of your life and it dies with you. No. Like Guru Maharaj was saying, your glory is when you actually create people who can defeat you. So to create better offspring, spiritual offspring, more people, create them like that. And by creating a lot of them, bringing people in and also having Daiva Varnashrams, calm communities where they're actually literally giving birth to them and doing the proper samskaras from birth. And you were also making that point of, how the Varna can be preserved within, even if 3 generations are not following, the Varna can still be preserved. So, that's the more or less foolproof solution to doing it. And he speaks a lot. I can look for this lecture. It's a little austere. There's a lot of Tamil translation going back and forth to listen, but it's totally worth listening to it. I remember that it was during that Sri Rangam camp. So I'm sorry about.
No, that's okay. I just have one comment. So from what I understand, and historically, what you're speaking about is sort of just, I don't know what to call it. It's not necessarily an institutional system. It's just by establishing a culture. Exactly. Basically, when you establish a culture, that culture will go on like that. That's the thing. The institution. Even Srila Prabhupada's ISKCON, his point in establishing ISKCON was to imbibe and establish that culture in the West, simply put.
That's the point.
So the institution, it may go through, historically, if you look at, materially, other institutions of this world, religious institutions, Gaudiya institutions, they all go through the same thing. But the institution may come and go. Actually, I was just thinking, I think somebody talks about this a little bit. Maybe Kananda Maharaj. I forget exactly. But there's different levels, right? The institutional level, there will always be fluctuations on the level, and there will be ups and downs.
There's 3 people, and they take shelter of the institution. The Kanishadikaris
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
The Madhyamadhikaris take shelter of the Bhagavatam and Japa, and the Uttamadhikaris take shelter of Krishna directly.
Exactly. That's why you see, when there's been...
He gave a class to us in New York 4 years ago, Kadamba March, and he was making this point. Can you repeat that?
You could repeat, exactly, sir.
So,
He was, making this point. It was a good observation, actually, that, when institution is, and and this he was his answer when I asked him, Marge, okay. Okay, I just, basically the Kanishthadikaris, they take shelter of the institution, whatever the institution goes, they all haribol along with it, But then the Madhyamadhikaris, they actually take shelter of the Japa and the Bhagavatam, And the Uttamadhikaris, they're always taking complete shelter of Krishna and nothing can face them.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point. That's what our acharyas have done. If you see, that's what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said with Vishvasya Vaishnava Raja Sabya. That's what Srila Prabhupada did. He didn't, although he tried to cooperate with the institution and that those were there, ultimately that's the point, that taking shelter of the actual process and then the culture that's there. So we can end there. So, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.